It was a quiet afternoon in a small town that sat between the rolling hills of Texas. The streets were mostly empty, except for a few people walking home from work and the sound of a dog barking in the distance. The sun hung low, painting everything with a golden light. It was the kind of day that made the town feel calm, like nothing bad could ever happen there. A teenage boy named Ryan was walking home from school. He had his backpack slung over one shoulder and a small bag of snacks in his hand. He had stopped at the corner store just like he did almost every day, to buy a bottle of soda and a pack of chips. Ryan was the kind of boy who didn't talk much. He loved helping his mom around the house and dreamed of becoming a mechanic one day. He wasn't perfect, but he was good at heart. Just a few blocks away, the quiet town suddenly erupted in chaos. The loud wail of an alarm filled the air. It came from the same corner store Ryan had just left. People turned their heads to see what was happening. The store owner rushed outside, shouting something about a robbery. No one knew exactly what had happened, but panic spread quickly. A few minutes later, 2 police cars screeched into the street. The officers jumped out, hands on their belts, looking for someone who might fit the description of a thief. One of them, Officer Reed, had a reputation in town. He was strict, quick to anger, and often treated people unfairly if they didn't look like what he thought good citizens should look like. Ryan, still walking with his snack and soda, had no idea what was going on behind him. When he heard the sirens, he turned his head slightly but kept walking, thinking it was just another accident. Suddenly he heard a deep voice yell, "Hey, you, stop right there." He froze, his heart jumped into his throat. He turned around slowly to see Officer Reed walking quickly toward him, hand already on his gun holster. "Where do you think you're going?" the officer barked. Ryan blinked, confused. "Home, sir? I just came from the store." "Yeah, I bet you did," the officer said coldly, stepping closer. "You match the description." "What description?" Ryan asked, trying to stay calm. Reed didn't answer. He looked Ryan up and down, his eyes narrowing. "Drop the bag. Hands where I can see them." Ryan did as he was told, his hands shaking. People nearby began to watch. Some whispered. Others just stared, unsure of what was happening. "I didn't do anything," Ryan said softly. Reed didn't listen. He grabbed Ryan by the arm and pushed him against the police car. Ryan winced. "You think you can just run out of a store and no one would notice?" "You picked the wrong town, kid," the officer said. "I didn't steal anything," Ryan said, his voice breaking. "You can check, please, I didn't." The officer tightened his grip. "Save it for the judge." Within minutes, Ryan was handcuffed. The other officer, younger and clearly uneasy, said, "Sir, maybe we should—" Reed cut him off. "I said cuff him. He fits the description." The young officer hesitated but followed orders. Ryan stood there humiliated as the crowd grew larger. Someone whispered, "That's the boy from the neighborhood. He's a good kid." Another person said quietly, "He didn't do anything. I saw him leave the store before the alarm went off." But no one stepped forward. The store owner came running toward them. "Hey, I didn't get a good look, but I think the guy who robbed me—" Reed interrupted again. "We've got him. We'll sort it out at the station." The owner frowned but didn't argue. The scene felt wrong, but it all happened too fast. Ryan sat in the back of the police car, heart pounding. He looked out the window, seeing the faces of people he'd known his whole life staring at him like a stranger. Tears burned his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He kept thinking about his mom, how worried she would be when he didn't come home. At the station, Reed walked him inside like he had already found his criminal. He filled out papers and barely looked at Ryan. "Name," he demanded. "Ryan," he whispered. "Full name," the officer snapped. Ryan gave it. Reed smirked. "Well, Ryan, looks like you had a bad idea today." Ryan shook his head. "Sir, please." "I didn't do anything. I just bought snacks. I have the receipt in my pocket." Reed didn't care. "You think that's gonna fool me? You probably grabbed it after you took the money." Another officer, older and calmer, entered the room. Reed slowed down. The kid's scared out of his mind. "Maybe we should check the footage before—" Reed waved his hand. "Already did. The kid matches. Hoodie, jeans, same height. That's enough for me." But the truth was, Reed hadn't even seen the full footage. He had caught only a glimpse of a shadow on the tape and jumped to a conclusion. Ryan sat in the holding room, trembling. Hours passed. He didn't know what time it was anymore. He stared at the gray wall, trying to hold on to hope that someone would believe him. Back home, his mother began to panic. Ryan never stayed out late. She called his friends, then the school, and finally the police station. When they told her he had been arrested, her world shattered. She rushed to the station, her hand shaking as she spoke to the officer at the desk. "I need to see my son," she said. "He didn't do anything. Please let me see him." The officer at the desk sighed. "Ma'am, we're still processing him. You'll have to wait." "Wait?" she said, her voice rising.
"He's 16 years old."
The officer looked uncomfortable but didn't respond. Through the small window of the holding room, Ryan saw his mother arrive. She looked frantic, her eyes red from crying. "Mom!" he shouted, pressing his hands against the glass. She turned and saw him. "Baby, are you okay? What happened?" "They think I robbed the store," he said, voice cracking. She shook her head. No, that's not true. "We'll fix this." Officer Reed stepped into the hallway just then. "Ma'am, please step back. Why are you doing this to him?" she cried. "He didn't do anything." Reed crossed his arms. "We have probable cause." "Probable cause?" she said angrily. "You mean you guessed?" The hallway went silent. The younger officer from earlier looked down, clearly ashamed. Reed frowned but didn't respond. He turned and walked away, leaving Ryan's mother in tears. That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flashing lights, the faces staring at him, the cold metal cuffs around his wrists. He wondered if this was how it always went, people getting blamed for things they didn't do just because they looked a certain way. By morning, local gossip had already spread. Some people said Ryan had been caught red-handed. Others said it was a misunderstanding. The truth was, no one really knew, but everyone had an opinion. At school, his classmates whispered. His teachers didn't say much, but their faces said enough. The town was small, and news traveled faster than facts. Meanwhile, the local news picked up the story. A brief segment aired that night saying, "Police arrest local teen in connection with convenience store robbery." There was no mention of proof. No mention of doubt. Just a headline that made him look guilty. At the police station, the young officer from before couldn't shake his guilt. He replayed the arrest in his mind again and again. Something didn't sit right. He decided to quietly check the store's security footage himself. When he watched it, he froze. The person in the video didn't look like Ryan at all. The thief was taller, wearing a different kind of hoodie, and had a tattoo on his neck, something Ryan didn't have. He printed the frame and brought it to Reed's office. "Sir, I think we made a mistake." Reed barely glanced at it. "That could be anyone. Don't overthink it. But sir, look at the build. It's not the same." Reed stood up sharply. "That's enough. You're new here. Learn how things work before you start questioning me." The young officer left, heart heavy. He knew he couldn't stay silent forever, but he also knew what crossing Reed could cost him. Back in his cell, Ryan whispered a prayer. He didn't know who was listening, but he hoped someone out there would see the truth. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the sound of the town's church bell in the distance. The day was ending the same way it had begun, quiet and still, but everything in Ryan's world had changed. Somewhere far away, the story was beginning to reach the ears of people who could actually help. But for now, all Ryan could do was wait and hold on to the small hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would believe him. The morning after the arrest felt heavy for everyone in town. The local newspaper printed a short story about the teen robbery suspect, and Ryan's picture, taken from his school file, was right there on the front page. It didn't say he was guilty, but it didn't say he was innocent either. For most people who only glanced at the headline, it was enough to make up their minds. At home, Ryan's mother sat by the kitchen table, her coffee untouched, staring at the newspaper. Her hands shook as she held it. The boy she had raised to always tell the truth was now being treated like a criminal. She didn't understand how things had gone so wrong so fast. Neighbors began to avoid eye contact. Some were kind, saying they hoped things would be cleared up soon, but others just looked away, whispering as they passed. She tried not to hear what they said, but the words still reached her ears. Words like troublemaker, I must have done something, and those kids are all the same. Each one felt like a cut she couldn't see but could deeply feel. Meanwhile, Ryan sat quietly in a small detention room. The gray walls made it hard to tell what time of day it was. A clock ticked somewhere above him, but the sound felt slow. like time itself didn't want to move. He hadn't slept much. Every time he started to drift off, a guard's footsteps or the echo of a door slamming brought him back. He kept thinking about school, about how his teacher had told him he had potential. He thought about his mom working late shifts to pay the bills. He thought about the look in her eyes when she saw him behind that glass window at the station. That look hurt more than anything else. Later that day, his mother managed to speak with a public defender who had taken the case. The man looked tired and overworked, his briefcase filled with folders. He told her he'd do what he could, but it might take time. "Ma'am," he said softly, "these things move slowly. We'll need to see the evidence, talk to witnesses, maybe check the camera footage if we can get it." "What do you mean, if?" she asked. "Sometimes the footage isn't clear, or it goes missing before it reaches us," he said, avoiding her eyes. "But don't worry, we'll keep pushing." She left his office feeling uneasy. She didn't know much about the legal system, but she could tell the lawyer didn't believe her son's innocence as strongly as she did. The next few days were a blur of waiting, phone calls, and unanswered questions. At school, Ryan's friends didn't know what to say. Some of them believed him. Others weren't sure. One of his teachers, Mr. Holloway, quietly visited his mother's house to offer support. "I've known Ryan since he was 12, he said gently. "He's not the kind of boy who steals. If you need me to speak for him, I will." She nodded with tears in her eyes. "Thank you. We need all the help we can get." Back at the police station, Officer Reed seemed satisfied with himself. He walked with the kind of confidence that came from years of no one questioning his actions. He told his colleagues the case was as good as done. When one of them mentioned the missing footage, he brushed it off, saying it probably wouldn't change anything, but not everyone agreed. The young officer from that day, Officer Lewis, still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He stayed late one evening, scrolling through the evidence log on the station computer. The footage from the store was listed as in review, but when he clicked the file, it said missing or damaged. His stomach sank. He decided to visit the store himself. The owner, a middle-aged man named Mr. Hahn, recognized him right away. "Officer, you hear about that boy?" Mr. Hahn asked. Lewis nodded. "I just need to ask a few questions. The camera footage, do you still have a copy?" Mr. Hahn frowned. "I gave one to the police the day after the robbery, but I also backed it up on another tape just in case." Lewis felt a small wave of hope. "Do you still have it?" "I think so. Come inside." In the back room of the store, Mr. Hahn pulled out a box of old recordings. He found the one labeled with the date of the robbery and handed it over. "I didn't want any trouble," he said quietly. "But something about that arrest didn't sit right with me." Lewis thanked him and promised to return it after reviewing it. He didn't tell anyone at the station. Instead, he went home, inserted the tape into his old player, and pressed play. The video was grainy but clear enough. The person who robbed the store was taller than Ryan, with a heavier build. He wore a hoodie, but his sleeves were rolled up, revealing a tattoo on his left arm. Ryan didn't have any tattoos. The man's shoes were different too, thick work boots instead of sneakers. Lewis froze the frame. His heart pounded. It was clear as day that this wasn't the same boy sitting in a cell right now. He knew he had to do something, but he also knew what going against Reed could mean. Reed had friends in high places, and anyone who challenged him usually ended up transferred, or worse. The next morning, Lewis tried to bring it up quietly. "Sir?" he said as he stepped into Reed's office. "I reviewed the footage from the store." Reed barely looked up from his paperwork. "And when it's not him?" "The kid didn't do it." Reed's eyes narrowed. "You're telling me that after everything, the witnesses, the timing, the evidence, you suddenly think he's innocent?" Lewis nodded. "It's not a feeling. It's on tape." Reed stood up slowly. "You're new here, right? Let me give you some advice. You start doubting yourself now, you'll never make it in this job. That boy fits the description. Sometimes that's enough." Lewis clenched his jaw. "Enough for you, maybe. Not for me." Reed leaned closer, his voice cold. "Watch yourself, rookie. Don't go making trouble where there isn't any." Lewis walked out, his hands shaking. He had seen injustice before, but never this close. He decided he couldn't let it go. That night, he called the same local reporter who had written the first story about the arrest. The reporter, a woman named Claire, listened carefully as Lewis explained everything. "If I show you this tape," he said, "can you make sure people see it?" "I can try," she said. but I'll need to verify it first. If it's real, it could change everything. They met quietly the next day. When she saw the footage, her expression changed from curiosity to shock. This isn't the same kid. You're right, Lewis nodded. The problem is the department won't let it out. Reed doesn't want to admit he was wrong. Claire took a deep breath. Then we'll have to make sure someone bigger sees it. By the next morning, the story began to spread online. It wasn't huge yet, but it caught the attention of people outside the small town. A few blogs and local stations picked it up, calling it a questionable arrest. Some commenters mentioned how this wasn't the first time something like this had happened under Officer Reed's watch. Ryan's mother saw the post on her neighbor's phone and burst into tears. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. Someone's finally listening, she whispered. At the same time, the town began to divide. Some people defended the police, saying they were just doing their job. Others were angry, saying the boy had been treated unfairly from the start. Outside the station, small groups began to gather, holding signs that said things like "Justice for Ryan" and "Check the tape." Reed watched from his office window, his jaw tight. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered. His superior officer came in. "We're getting calls from the mayor and the press. You better hope this case holds up." Reed nodded, but deep down he knew the truth was slipping away from him. In the middle of all this chaos, something unexpected happened. Claire, the reporter, got invited to cover a charity martial arts event in the nearby city. It was being hosted by Chuck Norris himself, who was well known for supporting community programs and helping underprivileged kids. During an interview break, Claire mentioned the story of Ryan and how unfair it was. Chuck listened quietly, his expression serious. When she finished, he asked, "Do you have proof?" She handed him a copy of the video. "See for yourself." He watched in silence, then looked up. "This kid's life is being ruined over something he didn't do," he said firmly. "Send me everything you have. I'll make some calls." Claire blinked. "You're actually going to help?" Chuck nodded. "I don't like bullies, especially when they wear a badge." He wasn't loud about it, but when Chuck Norris spoke, people listened. That night, he called one of his contacts in law enforcement and another in the media. Within a day, the story that had only been known in one small Texas town began spreading across the country. By the end of the week, national news networks were talking about it. Words like injustice and wrongful arrest filled the headlines. The police department was flooded with calls demanding answers. Ryan didn't know any of this yet. Sitting in his small cell, he only knew that his mom had visited that morning with a little more light in her eyes. "They're talking about your case," she said. "People are starting to see the truth." He didn't know how, but for the first time since that terrible day, he began to believe that maybe everything would be okay. Somewhere out there, someone was finally standing up for him, and soon the whole world would know what really happened. News spread faster than wildfire. What had started as a small-town story now reached television screens across the country. Reporters called it the wrongful arrest case that shocked Texas. It wasn't just about one boy anymore. It was about fairness, truth, and how one mistake could destroy a young life. Ryan didn't know the full scale of what was happening outside. Inside his cell, the world still felt small and quiet, but he could tell something had changed. Officers who used to ignore him now looked uneasy when they walked by. One even gave him an extra sandwich during lunch and whispered, "Hang in there, kid. Things are moving." His mother visited every day she was allowed. The first few visits were full of tears, but now there was hope in her voice. "People are talking about you everywhere," she said softly through the glass divider. "There are reporters outside. They know you didn't do it." Ryan smiled weakly. "Do they really believe me, Mom?" "They will," she said firmly. "The truth always comes out." Meanwhile, in the city, Chuck Norris was watching the story unfold on the news. He sat quietly in his office, his eyes fixed on the screen as the anchor talked about the case. There was something in the boy's face that reminded him of the kids he met through his youth foundation, kids who just needed someone to believe in them. Chuck wasn't the kind of man who made promises lightly, but this time he felt something different. He called his assistant and said, "Get me the contact of that reporter, Claire. I want to talk to her again." Within hours, he was on the phone with her. "Mr. Norris," Claire said, surprised to hear his voice. "I didn't expect you to actually get involved this much." "I can't just watch this happen," he replied. Do you still have that copy of the tape? Yes, I do. I also confirmed it with a few experts. One, it's genuine. The boy they arrested isn't the one on the tape. Chuck paused for a moment, thinking. Then we need to make sure this reaches the right people. Not just the media, the law itself. He made a few calls that night to people he knew in law enforcement and a friend who worked in the governor's office. He explained the situation, sent them the footage, and asked for an official review. In the small town, things started to heat up. Outside the police station, more people gathered each day, holding signs and chanting for justice. Local leaders began to question Officer Reed's decision, and the mayor demanded that the department cooperate fully with the investigation. Inside the station, Reed was furious. His once proud and confident stride now felt heavier. Who's spreading this nonsense? He barked at his team. No one answered. Everyone knew the truth, but no one wanted to face him directly. You think some celebrity and a bunch of reporters are going to tell me how to do my job? He said, slamming a folder onto the desk. That boy is guilty. I know what I saw. But even as he said it, his voice shook slightly. Deep down, he wasn't sure anymore. Officer Lewis, who had found the tape, stayed quiet. He didn't trust Reed, but he also didn't want to lose his job. Still, seeing the boy's face on the news made him feel something stronger than fear. Guilt. He knew he had to do more. That evening, Claire called him. The national news is picking this up, she said. Chuck Norris himself is getting involved. Are you ready to go public with what you know? Lewis hesitated. If I do, my career's over. She was silent for a moment. Then think about that boy sitting in a cell right now. What's his future if you stay silent? Lewis sighed. You're right. Let's do it. The next day, Claire ran a live interview with Lewis, his face partially hidden but his voice clear. He explained everything. How the tape proved Ryan's innocence, how the footage had gone missing inside the department, and how certain people didn't want the truth to come out. The interview aired nationwide. It caused a storm. Calls flooded the police department demanding answers. The state attorney's office announced it would open an investigation into the handling of the case. Reed watched the broadcast from his office, his face red with anger. He's lying, he shouted. He's just a rookie trying to make a name for himself. But no one believed him anymore. That afternoon, a black SUV pulled up outside the station. When the doors opened, people gasped. Chuck Norris stepped out, dressed simply in jeans and a jacket, his expression calm but serious. Reporters surrounded him instantly. Mr. Norris, are you here because of the case? One asked. Yes, he said firmly. I'm here because I believe an innocent boy has been wronged. And I'm not leaving until the truth is seen. The police chief came out surprised. Mr. Norris, with all due respect, this is a police matter. Chuck looked him in the eye. Then handle it properly. Inside, he met with the sheriff and the department's legal advisor. They showed him the official documents, but none of them could deny the evidence on the tape. Chuck didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm presence carried more weight than anger ever could. Look, he said, I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I just want this boy treated fairly. Review the footage. Let the truth speak for itself. The sheriff nodded slowly. We'll reopen the case immediately. That night, the footage was reviewed officially in front of the district attorney. Everyone watched as the grainy video showed the real thief, a man who looked nothing like Ryan. The silence in the room was heavy. No one could deny it anymore. By morning, the story was everywhere. Chuck Norris helps free wrongly accused teen flashed across TV screens. News vans lined up outside the courthouse. The town, once divided, was now buzzing with one shared feeling: relief. But it wasn't over yet. Ryan was still behind bars, waiting for official clearance. His mother arrived at the detention center with tears in her eyes, hoping this would finally be the day. When the guard opened the door and said, "You're free to go," Ryan just stood there, stunned. He couldn't believe it. His mother ran to him, hugging him tightly as tears streamed down her face. "You're coming home, baby," she whispered. "It's finally over." As they stepped outside, they were met by reporters and flashing cameras. Ryan didn't know what to say. All he could do was hold his mother's hand and keep walking. Across the street, Chuck Norris watched quietly from his car. He didn't want to make a scene or steal the spotlight. He just wanted to make sure the boy was safe. When Ryan's mother saw him, she walked over, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. Chuck smiled gently. "You don't have to. Just take care of your boy." Ryan, still overwhelmed, managed to say, "Thank you, sir. I'll never forget this." Chuck put a hand on his shoulder. "Remember, what happened to you doesn't define who you are. What you do next does." Later that day, the police department held a press conference. The sheriff admitted mistakes were made. Officer Reed was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. For the first time, Ryan's name was cleared publicly. But even though he was free, Ryan couldn't forget the fear and humiliation he had felt. Nights were still difficult. He'd wake up from dreams of flashing lights and loud voices, heart pounding, as if it was happening all over again. One evening, as he sat outside on the porch, his mother joined him. "You've been quiet," she said softly. He nodded. "I just keep thinking, if no one had believed me, I'd still be in there. I'd still be called a thief." She looked at him tenderly. "But people did believe you. That's what matters. You found out that even in a world full of injustice, there are still good people willing to stand up." He nodded again. "I guess so." The next day, he got a letter in the mail. It was from Chuck Norris. The handwriting was neat and simple. "Ryan, I'm proud of your courage. Never lose faith in yourself or the truth. The world needs more young people who keep going even when things seem unfair. Stay strong and make something good out of this. Chuck." Ryan folded the letter carefully and placed it in his notebook. He didn't know what his future would hold, but he knew he wanted to do something meaningful, something that would help others who were treated unfairly like he was. For now, though, he was just happy to be home. The sun was setting, and the sound of laughter came from down the street. Life was beginning to feel normal again, little by little. Inside his room, the same place he had dreamed of escaping from those cold walls, he took a deep breath. It was over, but in his heart, he knew this was just the beginning of something bigger, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been judged without being understood. The news about the boy's arrest had already reached people beyond the town, but things truly started to change when more reporters began to dig into the story. The small local story was now slowly becoming something much bigger. What started as one family's pain had now turned into a conversation about truth and justice. The boy's mother still couldn't sleep at night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her son sitting behind that glass wall trying to smile, trying to act strong even though she could see the sadness in his eyes. She told him to be patient, that good people were working to prove his innocence. He wanted to believe her, but days inside that cell felt like years. Meanwhile, the town was boiling with tension. People argued in shops, at gas stations, and even outside the courthouse. Some said the cop had done his job. Others said he had gone too far. But one thing everyone agreed on, the truth still wasn't clear. That's when the reporter who had been covering the case received a phone call that changed everything. It was from a man working at the same convenience store where the theft had happened. The man said quietly, "I think I have something you'll want to see." The reporter drove straight to meet him after dark. The man handed him an old tape, explaining that when the police came to collect the security footage, he had secretly made a backup copy just in case something went wrong. He didn't trust how fast the original had gone missing. The reporter thanked him and promised to keep his name out of it. As soon as he got home, he played the tape. His hand started shaking when he saw what was on it, the real thief. It wasn't the boy. The thief was clearly a grown man, wearing a dark hoodie, running out of the store just seconds after the alarm went off. The boy never appeared on the footage at all. That night, the reporter sent an email to a contact he had met recently, someone who had shown interest in helping. That person was Chuck Norris. Chuck had already heard the broad version of the story and was following it quietly. When he received the reporter's message with the video clip, he knew he couldn't stay silent anymore. He called the sheriff of the county the next morning and requested a meeting. The sheriff, surprised, agreed immediately. When Chuck arrived, people gathered just to see him. Some thought he was there for a film shoot. Others realized he was there for something serious. Inside the sheriff's office, Chuck placed the copy of the tape on the desk. "This boy is innocent," he said calmly. "You need to fix this before it gets worse." The sheriff looked uneasy. He had already started hearing about the national attention and knew his department's reputation was at stake. Within a day, the sheriff called a meeting with Internal Affairs. They decided to reopen the case. Officer Reed tried to object, saying it was unnecessary and that outsiders were stirring things up. But his voice didn't carry the same power anymore. Too many eyes were now watching. Investigators reviewed the new footage, compared timestamps, and confirmed that the boy couldn't possibly have been near the store at that time. He had been seen on a neighbor's doorbell camera walking home in the opposite direction minutes earlier. As the truth began to surface, local news stations aired the update. Reporters stood outside the small-town courthouse, saying words the boy's family had been praying to hear for weeks. New evidence proves the teenager may have been wrongly accused. The next day, the boy's lawyer filed a motion to reopen the case and requested his immediate release pending review. Chuck Norris decided to visit the family in person. When he knocked on their door, the boy's mother could hardly believe it. She thanked him again and again, tears rolling down her cheeks. Chuck simply shook his head and said, "Ma'am, I'm just glad people are paying attention now. Your son deserves to be home." Inside, the boy's younger sister sat on the couch holding a small drawing she had made. It showed her brother smiling beside their family. Chuck crouched beside her and said gently, "Keep believing in him, okay? Sometimes the truth takes time, but it always shows up." The next morning, the courtroom was full. Cameras lined the hallways and people crowded outside with signs saying, "Justice for the innocent." The prosecutor stood on one side, clearly nervous. The defense lawyer stood tall, clutching the evidence file. The judge entered and the hearing began. When the new footage played, the entire room went silent. The grainy image showed the real thief sprinting through the aisles, snatching a wallet and running out. The timestamp proved it happened after the boy had already left school and was walking the opposite way. The judge looked up from the screen and stared directly at Officer Reed. The officer shifted in his seat but said nothing. Then the reporter took the stand, explaining how he had received the copy of the tape. The man from the store wasn't named, but his bravery changed everything. The defense lawyer laid out the timeline clearly, showing that Reed had ignored multiple witnesses who said the boy was innocent. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Even the prosecutor couldn't deny the facts anymore. Finally, the judge spoke. His voice was steady and calm. "In light of this new evidence," he said, "it is clear that the defendant was wrongly accused. The court orders his immediate release." The boy's mother broke down in tears, covering her face as the words sank in. The boy himself couldn't stop shaking, his eyes filled with tears he had held back for weeks. He turned to his lawyer and whispered, "It's over?" The lawyer nodded, smiling softly. "It's over, son. You're free." Chuck, sitting quietly in the back row, just nodded once and smiled faintly. He didn't want the attention. He wasn't there to be a hero. He was there because it was the right thing to do. When the boy was led out of the courtroom, the crowd erupted in applause. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and strangers clapped his back as he walked past. For the first time in weeks, he felt sunlight on his face without fear. Outside the courthouse, Chuck waited near the steps. When the boy saw him, he ran over and hugged him tightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling. Chuck put a hand on his shoulder and replied, "You don't owe me thanks. You owed it to yourself to be believed." Officer Reed, meanwhile, was placed on administrative leave while the department launched an internal investigation. The sheriff, now under pressure, promised a full review of the case. Some officers defended Reed, saying he had made a mistake, while others stayed quiet. But everyone knew this case had changed things forever. That evening, the boy's family hosted a small gathering at their home. Neighbors came with food, hugs, and apologies for not speaking up sooner. The boy smiled, saying he understood. "Sometimes people are afraid to get involved," he said softly. "But I'm just glad someone finally did." Chuck spent a few minutes with the family before leaving. As he walked to his car, the reporter asked him if he wanted to make a public statement. He shook his head and said, "No statement needed. The truth speaks for itself." Then he got in his car and drove away quietly. In the days that followed, national media continued to cover the story. It became a topic of discussion on talk shows and news programs. People praised Chuck for using his platform to help, but he always redirected the credit toward the courage of those who brought the truth forward. He said in one brief interview, "There are good cops out there. There are good people everywhere. But sometimes the system needs to be reminded that justice isn't about pride. It's about doing what's right." The boy's release didn't just bring relief. It brought change. Community leaders started organizing meetings to talk about fairness and respect. Schools began hosting open discussions about equality and empathy. People who once stayed silent started to speak up. For the boy, life was slowly returning to normal, though he knew he'd never forget what happened. When reporters asked him what he'd learned through it all, he said that the truth can be buried, but it never dies. Someone, somewhere, will always find it. That night, as the family sat together in peace for the first time in a long while, the boy looked up at the stars outside his window. He whispered to himself, "Thank you," not just to Chuck Norris, but to everyone who believed in him when hope felt far away. And somewhere in that quiet town, justice had finally taken a deep breath, the kind that comes when the truth is finally free to stand on its own.